But I'll
there, and one of the things before I introduce myself is just say that it's meant to be a discussion rather than the professorial lecture. So don't feel shy about interrupting or asking questions as I'm going through, but there'll be material as a backdrop as we talk about things.
Yeah, I didn't want to confuse people by getting sidetracked in the slideshow, but I just wanted to welcome you and to say we're going to try to figure this out. I know you have a great deal of information, and so I think the plan is for you to just to speak for a little bit about what microgrids are, why we're concerned about them, and how they might be applicable in Marin County, which is, I don't know how representative we are of various areas. We're probably not in a lot of ways, but we're looking at microgrids in the context of where we are now, and certainly within MCE's more diverse territory. So I guess welcome to take it away, Peter.
Sure. Yes, I'm Peter Schwartz. I've been in the energy and utility industry for over 42 years now. And I've kind of worked at it from all sides, from being in construction to working at PG&E as Director of Business Energy Management, where I had the entire commercial and industrial energy efficiency portfolio under me. And then also been active in policy and code setting for many years, in particular in California since 1984, working on the California Title 24 energy standards since back then. And my most recent role has been as a principal investigator at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab in the Building Technology and Urban Systems Division. And the types of projects that I've been working on are around grid modernization and demand response, and also working with the California Public Utilities Commission on the demand response potential study, which has been kind of a landmark study identifying resources around the state to provide demand response. And with that, I want to see if I can launch this PowerPoint. Sometimes I work on a dual monitor and I never know which way it's going to present. So if I fumble a bit, that's why. And look at that. You should be seeing my desktop, and then let's see if it works as slideshow. All right, are you able to see the title slide? Oops.
Is there something? Here we go. Yes.
Do you see the title slide?
Yes, I do. Do we all?
Okay.
I think we all do.
Great.
Yes, you're up.
Yes.
So, as we're talking about, we're going to be discussing microgrids, but it's important to kind of set a context when we are talking about microgrids, because we all know that the electricity grid infrastructure is in need of modernization. And I'll get my slides to advance, that'd be useful. There we go. That not only is the grid in need of modernization, but also electricity markets, in particular, the rates and tariffs require an overhaul. And this is due to the evolving policy changes around climate change, carbon emission reductions, electrification, renewables, ratepayer equity, et cetera. And that's why we're all interested and participating in this from our various organizations, communities, et cetera. The other reason is there's been such rapid technology innovation and adoption way beyond what people have predicted, not the least of which is the number of Teslas driving around Marin. So we never thought there'd be such a rapid adoption of electric vehicles in California. And that's only going to grow substantially as we begin to electrify our transportation infrastructure. The other thing is that we need to understand, it's no longer the grid of the past where it's a central command and control. It's moving towards the grid of the future, which I describe as going from bidirectional to omnidirectional. And what I mean by that is that energy can be delivered not only from a utility down to a customer, but also between customers. And this is particularly relevant with microgrids because that's the whole point. So as we think about that, we need to know with the actions we're talking about microgrids in Sausalito, how that might impact the distribution network elsewhere in Marin, which in turn might impact what's going on in PG&E's distribution area in Northern California, which further links to the California Independent System Operator operating the Western grid. So there's a balancing act that needs to occur so that harm isn't created one way or another from either direction. And that's also why we're here with the power shutoff from PG&E or thoughts of putting diesel generators everywhere is, we have to think about the implications on the grid and relative to the environment for that. The other imperative is, here's just a quick graph of the peak megawatts in California with a high of 50,270 megawatts back in 2006. What this doesn't tell you is what day of the year and what hour of the day. And why that's important is that we know the grid is highly variable. And so we need to build flexibility into the grid. So we're looking at reliability, particularly in Marin, it's important because we're a electricity peninsula. The grid comes in via the transmission line along Highway 37 and heads down again towards Sausalito, but you see no power lines running across the Golden Gate Bridge. And so we are at the end point of electricity peninsula. The other attributes, as you can read, are important. One that I think is of keen focus again here in Marin is to make sure that the grid is equitable, that the wealthiest ratepayers are being treated, or I think, let me flip it around. The poorest ratepayers are being treated with the same equity as the wealthiest ratepayers, that there isn't a disparity in service between those customers. So the market constraints are complex, and we could spend 2 days on a presentation working up and down the food chain, and I'm going to cut it down into about a minute here. So as we look at microgrids, microgrids is a microcosm of what's occurring higher up on the grid. And so things around reliability, ramping, resiliency, and security are important aspects when we think about microgrids. So these market issues spell opportunities. So for example, if we're looking at from MCE's perspective, is that they could begin to develop and employ distributed energy resources that address these issues in the first bullet, and that has currency in the electricity markets, meaning those are potential revenue streams. And what I liken it to whenever I think of a large energy infrastructure project that I've worked on is to look for a waste stream that I can turn into a revenue stream. And so, for example, in Marin, we have a number of waste streams that the Conservation League is concerned about. And this might have to do with methane production from cattle ranching in West Marin to the sanitary district near San Quentin, being able to tap those waste streams, flip them around, and turn them into revenue streams by integrating the resources to meet what Marin's customers need. The other thing that is important is the state is looking to launch an electrification initiative. So as we think about our own homes in Marin, California is one of those markets in the US that has a large natural gas infrastructure. If you move to other parts of the country, they tend to be all electric in providing things like water heating and space heating. Here in Marin, most everyone has a natural gas furnace or natural gas water heater. The state is heavily invested in moving towards electrification, in large part because of the large amount of overproduction of solar at midday. So, and we can see that in the graph on the right here is the yellow line. I get my cursor there. This yellow line is solar at midday. And one of the challenges we have is, one, the ramp in the morning and this downward ramp in the afternoon and evening. This, to me, spells opportunity for a microgrid to address that. Now, in the distribution area in Marin, we have our own particular load shapes. One of the things that we do get some impact is with any wind production. Wind is much less predictable and more highly variable than the sun. So when we think about what microgrid can do, we have to think about the grid services. And so things we'd like to do is maybe shave this peak, deal with the overgeneration. And then within that, if you look at what's going over the wires, if you zoomed in on an area here, you'd see a wide range of peaks and values. And that has to do with the regulation of voltage and frequency on the grid. What we like to see is that those curves are very clean sinusoidal curves. Otherwise, it's hard to maintain the equipment that manages the grid, but also within customers. So for instance, if you have a silicon chip manufacturer, they need very tight voltage in order to not spoil their production of silicon chips. And so all those things have value. These are essentially all the different markets that the CAISO, or California Independent System Operator, offers. And so a microgrid could provide some of these services and get paid for it. And the reason I bring this up is a little later we'll talk about, well, how do you generate capital to pay for putting in a microgrid? And so kind of keep that in mind. Here is just to describe again some of the opportunities. I just pulled this up yesterday. This is a little app I have on my iPhone that you can zoom in and see all the distributed energy resource prices. And here in Northern California, what we're showing is the price is positive, but when you get into Southern California, the prices are starting to go negative. I popped up one near Kettleman where it's, minus $100 per megawatt hour to pay into the grid. And what this means is these are likely two solar farms where they have no place for the electrons to go at midday. So they're essentially paying the market to take their energy. And on the left, we can just see what I was talking about with the amount of dynamic pricing that occurs on the market. And so each of these price spikes spells opportunity to me. So if you can configure your microgrid properly, you can take advantage of earning money in these areas of variability. And any questions so far? I don't want to dominate this conversation here. So if you have a question, just kind of raise your hand in the chat and either that or unmute yourself. If not, I'll continue on. So another area, and these are a bit blurry, sorry about that, is when we look at markets, we look at areas where we want to shed load. And so when you look at a microgrid and you're looking at its operation, that's a time where you begin to start what we call islanding, or you start operating resources or building loads within your microgrid to do shedding. And so this is so you can participate in demand response markets. And so for example, if you have a large commercial building, you might turn down your air conditioning or dim your lighting system. If you're an industrial, you might reduce production at midday, or right now our peak tends to be from 5 to 9 p.m. Another one is what we call shimmy, and shimmy deals with load flexibility. So this deals with following variable renewables on the grid, like the wind falling off or a cloud bank coming over and cutting your solar. You need to have resources that can address shimmy. And then shift is taking resources that would normally operate in the evening and shifting them to the middle of the day to soak up that excess solar capacity. Now, keep that in mind as I talk later about opportunities, in particular in Marin. And then shape is kind of a long-term strategy where you change your load curve on an annual basis. And this is more of a price response. And remember in the beginning, I talked about that rates and tariffs can be a problem. And so shape is something you do to address that. And a lot of you are familiar with microgrids, but for some of you who are less familiar, and I'm not going to read everything on here, microgrids has significant advantages to customers and utilities. Not the least of which is generally when you're putting in a microgrid, you're addressing the loads that are part of the microgrid and trying to make them more energy efficient and more easily controllable. So microgrids are able to reduce overall energy consumption, which is a good thing, which obviously has environmental benefits. And also by reducing energy consumption, you're able to build in reliability and flexibility of those loads. The other thing has to do with just operational benefits to the overall grid. And then there's a philosophical aspect. So when we look at locally controlled systems, they're more likely to be more balanced, wiser choices between how the investments are made in efficiency and supply technologies. And what we're talking about today is what can we do to avoid PG&E throwing diesel generators everywhere. Personally, I don't consider that a wise investment, and that's an editorial comment. But I think we're all recognizing having noisy generators with diesel fumes, it's probably not a good idea. So a locally controlled microgrid could mitigate that. The other thing, excuse me, that microgrids can do is bundle up or aggregate a number of resources and present them to the megagrid or the larger grid in a more coherent resource. And what this does is help the utility avoid spending money on infrastructure it doesn't need. So if we make the microgrid a more reliable, resilient resource, PG&E doesn't have to put in infrastructure to address what might be a historical peak at some point. And then lastly, on the side is microgrids are an important component of what we're calling smart grids. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. So I touched on how a microgrid can present resources to the larger grid. But the other aspect that is important is that a microgrid can also shut off its connection to the larger grid and become an electrical island. This is an important aspect in Marin, in particular if PG&E is shutting off power due to wildfire or some other reason, and we can island the city of San Rafael or other parts of Marin, then we don't have to shut down electricity service to the customers or businesses. And let's talk a little bit about major types. And some of you are already familiar about this, but what I heard earlier during the introduction is we're talking about what we consider customer microgrids. And so the most frequent one we hear about in Marin is a community microgrid. But we also have within MCE's service territory things that involve large institutional areas like hospitals or campuses. And then if we're talking about West Marin, or I've worked with the Petaluma Coast Guard Training Center, one of the things we talked about was doing a remote off-grid, basically creating a standalone microgrid that is not even connected to PG&E. And then we have military bases. And then there are microgrids that involve incorporating kind of the legacy part of the regulated grid. And so obviously a microgrid is going to aggregate a variety of different resources from solar, battery, wind, electric vehicles, and then building loads, and then work through a controller. And I'll touch on that a little more. So major components, again, any questions? Feel free to just dive in, anybody. Okay. Major components. One thing we have to recognize is that microgrids, you don't go to Home Depot, buy a generator and say, I have a microgrid. A microgrid is a system of a variety of major components that by and large are custom designed for the application. Rarely would you say one size fits all, and there's a number of manufacturers in play and a number of different business models associated with microgrids. So for example, a large customer might develop their own microgrid. We work, for example, with Fort Hunter Leggett on the other side of the mountains from Monterey, which was out in the middle of nowhere, and one distribution line into it, and had massive loads associated with the Army that was highly unreliable. And so, you know, that one type of solution versus we're going to work with a college campus that is going to do something, or we're going to do a small community where we're going to aggregate up some residential customers and do a microgrid. All those different things require different equipment and different design. So probably had a chance to read what the controller does, and I'll again touch on that a little more. Fundamental to any microgrid is kind of a fast and secure communication, because we need to monitor what's going on within the microgrid and outside the microgrid on a real-time basis. When I showed you all those electricity markets, those energy electric services, they operate either on a day ahead, hour ahead, 15-minute ahead, 5-minute ahead, or 1 second interval. So we need to monitor different time frames on a real-time basis in order to make sure that the microgrid is operating the way it should be. The other thing is it allows us to optimize our distributed energy resources. And what we mean by that is a distributed energy resource can either be a lighting system, an electric vehicle, a battery, or our renewable production. And in all these things, we need to be able to connect to buildings via an energy management system or a building automation system. We need to be able to see what is the health of the various components. We need, as we know, smart metering to obtain load and DER profiles. And then we need to be able to address electricity pricing and demand response capabilities. And the reason is there's one way to optimize energy, but depending on the time of year, time of day, and what type of facilities are attached, there be different rates and tariffs. And so part of it is we also need to optimize the economic flow of money to make sure we might be doing something that's smart on an energy basis, but we may be paying a high price on rates and tariffs. So that part becomes a balancing act. And lastly, we need continuous communication to the utilities and the energy markets. And I'm not going to read everything here. I'm simply going to say one of the fundamental components to make this happen is a new concept that we call an energy services interface. And this is a communication, either device or protocol that allows us to do transactional energy. So this enables us to participate in those electricity markets, either for demand response or those ancillary services, those grid services I listed earlier. And I'm working with the California Energy Alliance on developing language to incorporate ESI into California Title 24, and I did a snapshot of the draft language, and I want to highlight one thing here. And so it's important that this energy service interface be an open architecture, and that it have be a certified protocol that future-proofs a microgrid moving into the future. Because if you pull in a proprietary interface, it may not be able to communicate with PG&E, nor may it be able to participate in the electricity markets. So an ESI currently must use what's called OpenADR 2.0b, and this is connected to what's called a virtual end node. And so if we look at it schematically, an ESI sits between, this cloud represents all the things that might be in a microgrid with external actors, meaning PG&E or other service providers or market aggregator or even other communities. And so the CSI is kind of this bi-directional interface.
Peter, this is Doug.
Sure.
I've heard that perhaps a bad example of this is Tesla, which is basically a closed system, and it has the potential to use EVs and EV batteries as a resource, which would not be open to other players or other uses. Is that what you're talking about here with a closed versus open system?
Well, so for example, there are some microgrid providers where their sort of management communication function is not OpenADR 2.0b compliant. And what that means is, by and large, it cannot communicate effectively to PG&E and participate in the CAISO electricity markets. So it may have some attributes that enable it to receive signals from the grid, but going back the other way, it has less capability. Now, with that said, that doesn't mean Tesla isn't using OpenADR 2.0b in its controller. It just hasn't gone through the certification. So I can guarantee you that the CAISO has very, very specific requirements about who they let into their markets. And so they need to, if you think about it, you know, we use PayPal. PayPal is our human equivalent of OpenADR 2.0b. It ensures that banks trust what we're saying when we're sending $100 to our cousin, and that the cousin's receiving it. So it's a transactional protocol. Does that answer your question, or did I dance the wrong way?
For now, it does, yes.
Okay.
I just want to point out we have a couple of other, sorry, this is Kirsten Nolan. We have a couple other questions in the chat. But I don't know if, Peter, you want to take a look at now, or if you want to save those for the end.
Sure. Let me, trying to figure out how in this presentation mode, I don't know if I can get to the chat.
I can read one from Dale Miller. He says, how can microgrids be implemented in Marin where there is strong opposition to 5G communications and in some cases smart meters?
Well, we should probably lump that in with the measles vaccine question, but sorry for being flip. So now the opposition to smart meters, we have to ask, you know, what is the fear? And so the most noteworthy one that I'm aware of is the radio transmission that occurs out of smart meters. And it's something that I had to reflect on when they put one on our building or our house, because it was right outside my son's bed. And so one of the aspects of smart meter is how frequently does it actually broadcast, and what is the risk associated with that. So by and large, smart meters are safe from a broadcast standpoint, and but it's, you know, that's something that if we want to make Marin meet all the goals that we're all interested in, we do have to adopt certain technology. We just have to be well versed in what is the best application of that, and not to put it in willy-nilly without accommodating the risks to inhabitants or flora and fauna. So, and what was the other part of that? Was the smart meter, and what was?
Opposition to 5G communications and smart meters.
So I'm presuming 5G is not wanting cell towers all over the county. And so with cell towers, the issue again is how close are you? And coming, the other thing that I didn't mention is I come from a physics background. That's what I studied in college. And so there's the inverse square law. And so anything like a cell tower, the intensity of the radiation falls off with the inverse square of the distance from that source. So unless you're very close to it, the problems with that is minimized. There's a whole other issue of whether or not they look good, but I won't address that. Other questions?
Yeah, there's one from David Kuhnhart. He says, Peter, is there an ESI that is in the lead of development? And what is your take on, I believe it's HEILA, H-E-I-L-A?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the second part. So ESIs are in use right now. And one of the things, I could do a whole day on ESIs. So when we, just give a little background. So an ESI can resemble your router that might be sitting next to you right now. So it can be a hardware software gateway, but an ESI can exist in the cloud. So if we think about a market player like Google, who is getting heavily, and Microsoft getting heavily into the energy space, an ESI can provide that functionality in the cloud. And so when you think about controlling an aggregated bunch of Nest thermostats, Google does that up in the cloud. Now, the other place an ESI exists is in the network lighting control system. A number of the manufacturers have OpenADR compliant lighting control systems that can take a signal directly from PG&E, or in this case, MCE, and then act like a microgrid does within a building and change how various loads can function in the building. So it's not one single implementation. There's a number of different system architectures. Now, the tricky part about all this that you have to think about with microgrids is depending on how you develop and design your microgrid comes a whole list of attendant standards. So for instance, an ESI in the cloud adheres to a different set of standards than an ESI that might be a hardware software gateway. And we're dealing with the standard setting community on that to kind of make sure that each of the standards has the right functionality to enable these different system architectures associated with different business models. I hope that addresses David's question.
Peter and everybody, this is Doug. I just wanted to mention time flies when we're having fun here. But we have just maybe 10 or 15 more minutes if we split.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure that people come away with something usable in terms of their understanding of what we might be doing in Marin County. So Peter, I would say, you please feel free to finish up, but we want to make sure we have some time for questions about in a more general sense too. So
sure. Let me just flip through a couple microgrid examples. This one is Santa Rita Jail, which is one of the more advanced microgrids. And I've actually been out to the site and worked with them in some of my earlier professional roles. And this one, we don't hear about this frequently, but it has a molten carbonite fuel cell, which is what this thing by Chevron is over here. And the idea obviously here is to make sure that if there's grid problems, the jail doesn't run out of electricity to deal with their inmates. So this one's all about reliability. If you ever get a chance to go out there to see it, it's really phenomenal. Another one is University of San Diego, which has one of the larger microgrids, in this case, a 42 megawatt microgrid with comprising 11 million square feet of buildings, which is big. It also has a big cogeneration plant, and which has gas turbines, steam turbines. And what they're able to do with that is to take, again, waste streams and put it into a steam turbine, and then take the waste off the steam turbine for things like hot water for dormitories and other things. They also have a fuel cell that's powered using methane from a wastewater treatment plant. And so when we think about the sanitary district by San Quentin, it might be possible to pull methane gas from that to power a fuel cell. And then they have energy storage with battery and chemical storage, ultra capacitors for dealing with things that need to happen instantaneously, and then a thermal energy storage system, which they use for like day ahead type stuff. And I just wanted to give you a quick flavor. Now, if we talk about Marin, some of the things that come to mind, in particular, if we want to address disadvantaged communities, I took a snapshot last night of the canal region in San Rafael. And we know it's kind of retail businesses and car dealerships. And then this community, the Canal Street community. And the idea is, okay, if we're looking at this area of San Rafael, how might we develop a microgrid? And what obviously comes to mind to me is pulling in the supermarket, Maria Pueblo supermarket, the Marin Health and Wellness Campus. And the idea there is what you're trying to do is mix and match loads with available distributed energy resources, whether it be renewables on these larger commercial properties, and then being able to take that and use energy storage to provide electricity at night to these disadvantaged homes. That might be a type of implementation, just as a quick example of a community microgrid. There might be another one that ties in downtown San Rafael with the commercial district, because if we have excess renewables, then we can power those commercial office and retail buildings in downtown San Rafael. Another example that I didn't talk about that I do want to touch on and is particularly germane to MCE is if we look at MC service territory, which includes all these communities in Marin, Napa, Solano, and Contra Costa County, is you can develop a virtual microgrid that taps resources in other counties to power loads in Marin and vice versa. There's nothing that says it has to be sitting right next door. And that's the beauty of our electricity infrastructure, is that the resources do not need to be co-located. They can be across the bay as long as we can connect them either via an electricity market or via the, wires directly across the transmission lines coming across here. So I wanted to throw that out for discussion too. And then, you know, kind of close out is the whole focus here is on enabling technologies. We've listed some of the components. We have to think about the performance, speed of response, magnitude, persistence, how long they're going to be around, and then how quickly customers are willing to adopt. And we've already heard some questions around 5G and smart meters, that there's some resistance within Marin and elsewhere about adopting certain technology. And we can't ignore that, but we have to mitigate that and address those things if we're going to move forward. And I think with that, I'm going to end here. There's a lot more detail I could have gone into, but I want to open it up for questions.
Hey, Peter, this is Vicken from MCE. Just want to let you know that a few times I hear someone has so much experience in the field. You blew past me. I have 35 years. I was part of the startup team of the California ISO. So probably we can talk for weeks, if not longer, on what's going on. But yeah, given the this group and a couple of your examples, I just want to take a couple minutes. Doug, is that okay? I just want to explain what we are.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have, just for everybody's knowledge, we have about 37,000 rooftop solar customers in our footprint. They represent about a little over 350 megawatts of generation capability that we don't need to buy in the market. The other thing is that we are really strongly transitioning to non-fossil fuel-based resources, including in the development of microgrids. We just issued an RFP to see how much green hydrogen we can generate to use it in generating resources with surplus photovoltaic generation. So we're really, pinning the really out there in being not only, doing a microgrid, don't use diesel, don't use natural gas, but transfer into hydrogen development. We are very interested in doing 100% microgrid that can actually carve itself out. The other side is we are working on microgrids that can have the bidirectional flow with the grid. And also, as a last example about virtual microgrid, we just issued an RFP wherein we're gonna provide a contract to a TRC of starting with needy neighborhoods in low-income families where there is solar generation already. We will install battery walls at those sites. And the next step is, to provide resiliency in PSPS events that the solar is generating, the battery is charging, and therefore, and by the way, Peter, I really appreciate your comments about some frequency, voltage, and stability, things like that. So that's very comforting to me that you actually know what you're talking about. That's really great. So
I spent a lot of time with John Gooden up at the CAISO. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, John is a good friend of mine. So what my goal is that, you know, we're going to start with the needy and the low income and what have you, but the goal is to migrate into a virtual interdependent microgrid or a system where I'm tapping into the electric water heaters that are dispatchable, the EV cars that are connected on site for charging and discharging potential, checking the condition of the battery for charging and discharging vis-a-vis what is the nodal market is doing in the ISO system, like you shared one of those charts in the day ahead and in the active hour about when is the right time to charge and discharge depending on the condition of the battery. That means in real-time situational awareness that we are investing in about all these systems to know, you know, you don't want to send a signal to a battery to charge if it's fully charged, right? And we want to, my intent is to even capture the negative pricing in the ISO market where, let's say in the duck curve where there is a lot of energy, you know, that's when we're going to absorb, create hydrogen if we can, and also charge our storage systems. So I'll stop right there. I really liked your presentation. I just want to let everybody know that we seem to be in parallel, at least in some of the ideas.
Yeah, just a quick comment. So I pulled this slide back up because some of the other aspects we talked about relative to large energy infrastructure and storage is in the Delta, there's ability to do pump storage underground in former salt caverns. There's natural gas storage fields there. There's nothing that says we couldn't do pump storage, either compressed air or in some instances, hydrogen. The other thing that in terms of electrification is there's opportunity to develop a program to bring in an aggregator if MCE doesn't have the available capital to convert all of Marin and or its service territory from gas to electric water heating and either heat pump water heating or heat pump for air conditioning and heating. And then additionally with switching over to electric vehicles, it's important on all this discussion, we talk about the appropriate time frame. We can't think 1 year, 2 year, 5 years. No. We have to think 20, 30, 50 years out, because if you look at any of the buildings you've ever been in, when's the last time you changed a light fixture? Right? When's the last time you changed out an air conditioner? It's typically on a 20-year or 30-year cycle. So why I'm putting that down as the foundational block is if we think about how Marin needs to change, you look at all these parking lots, and if you think about autonomous electric vehicles, do we need parking lots? The other thing is, how can we charge them nimbly rather than always driving to a house or always driving to a commercial? One of the things we worked at with the Army was taking advantage of all the street lights, putting in oversized battery and solar on street lights, and providing dispatchable electric vehicle charging at street lights or parking lot lighting. And so you could fold that into your mix. And Vicky, I like the idea of, you bringing up dispatchable, reading when I can charge or discharge my electric vehicle. At the lab, we're dealing with software of using artificial intelligence to develop behavioral patterns around electric vehicles such that you don't discharge your car and participate in the grid if you actually need to go drive it to work. So there's that aspect. So AI is getting into tracking how people function not only in commercial buildings but at home, and that will help enable us to do this control that he was talking about and being able to dispatch resources on the grid, particularly in a microgrid situation. And Doug, I'll shut up because I know we're beyond time.
Thank you.
Okay. This has been a great conversation. Thank you very much, Peter, for the presentation. I'm sure there are a lot of us who have a lot of questions. It's very detailed stuff, and we're not going to be able to answer everybody's question about what an ESI is or something like that, you know, because we're not all experts. But I want to make sure that people get the basics of what's happening. Vicken, thank you very much for telling us a little bit about what MCE is doing.
Of course.
I was really happy to see that your recent RFO is looking at longer range solutions, particularly hydrogen. That's, you know, I'm not quite sure where to begin with a lot of questions. We have a chat screen full of questions. I know you've been collecting them, Kirsten. Do you have some that have come up on chat that maybe we can put to Peter before we all totally run out of time?
Well, I was actually just going to ask Peter, because I know we're about 8 minutes later in the agenda. And there are a lot of questions. Peter, would it be okay if we could forward some of these questions to you?
Sure, and I just want to do just a real quick one on the 5G. So the communication on the microgrids generally is not done via 5G per se. It's generally done over the internet as it exists today, or through other technology. So it's not necessarily related to what we're doing on our cell phones as a communication piece of it. So it depends again on what the system architecture related to microgrids. So you know, we can talk in more detail about that later. But there's some great questions in there, and we'll work to address those.
Kirsten, this conversation has been recorded. Is that true?
Correct.
I want to make sure everyone knows how to get access to it, because maybe we'll want to check back on it. You know, this is better probably than doing minutes or something like that. Is it pretty understandable for most people that how to get back and look at this, look at the recording?
What we'll do is we'll send out a link in an email, and then it will also be a link on the MCL website.
Great.
The other thing that you may want to do, Doug, is I think there's a feature when you play the Zoom recording, you can actually turn on transcription software in your laptop, so you don't have to type it up. It'll talk to it, your computer, and then you just have to clean up a few words here and there. So if you wanted like written minutes, that'd be one way to address that.
Oh, that'd be a nice feature. Okay.
Could you, Doug, sorry, could you share if in case you haven't already, share the presentation with us?
Sure, Peter.
If Peter is okay with it?
Yeah, I have no problem. It might be large, so it might be best to maybe post it on the MCL website so people could pull down.
Oh.
Because I think email, people have certain limits. I haven't looked at see how big the file is, but with all the graphics, I'm certain it's going to be big.
We could probably do that. That's what do you have? Maybe fewer than 20 slides.
We can work that out.
On the subject of microgrids, this is from basically anybody who's not necessarily into the wonkiness of it. are there basic questions about where we are and what we might want to do in Marin County?
Yeah, hi, Doug. This is David Haskell.
Sure.
One of the things that, as a practitioner in the field, we're constrained by policy. I appreciate, Peter, that you gave examples that related basically to a utility-centric point of view and how it interfaces and how it can be grid supportive, which is what it's all about. But in many of us down at the much more resiliency level have real problems because neighbors can't share power. It's against the regulations.
Right.
A whole slew of regulations that just really negate this whole conversation. And that would be one area perhaps we could open up and have another whole conversation about. But Peter, do you have any comment about the PUC and the ability for people to will power to one to another in a community, across streets, all the things that really make a microgrid real, and we're not allowed to do today?
Sure. Yeah. And thank you for that question, because it's the area of policy that drives me nuts. Because the kind of the regulation around that is to maintain the safety and security and reliability of the grid, so you don't have a couple parties pulling down the whole grid because of circumstances. So one of the things that we see happening and is evident in the promulgation of CCAs in the first place is there's a detachment of the traditional grid organization, right? So PG&E no longer controls the customers in Marin, MCE does. With MCE faces the same issues, that some of its customers may break off and do an aggregation if they fall within the regulatory construct. An example at the PG&E level is Dow Chemical in Pittsburgh area, Martinez. They created their own microgrid and pulled in an industrial customer next to them, and they would just operate according to what was best for them and not necessarily best for upstream. So to think about how do we address that here is to take advantage of load aggregators and essentially work with MCE to use a business model wherein you can aggregate up residential customers so they could swap power and resources between them, but it's through entities that the regulators allow us to do so. Short of that, we need to change policy, but accompanying that policy are the standards by which these customers would need to adhere to so trouble would not ensue. And there's different kinds of trouble. One is just the physical infrastructure, but the other is a market disruption. You wouldn't want an MCE to face a whole bunch of customers falling off and doing bilateral deals between one another, and they'd lose their customer base. So if it's done within a larger coherent approach, I'm with you on that one.
We're going to probably have to, this is the kind of.
Hey, Doug, can I add one comment?
Sure, briefly.
Can I have 1 minute? I want to respond to that because the existing distribution grid can support electricity flowing both ways. I mean, that's the physics of it. Electricity can go down a wire or up a wire. Right. And the notion that we need to connect directly across streets and stuff is actually worrisome for me, because that would really slow us down when we can actually leverage the existing distribution grid, being able to do generation and storage optimized around a community to provide that energy system to, you know, the local needs, for the local needs, without having to run wires across streets or connect homes or businesses directly. And we've done these projects before where we've done, you know, power flow analysis of a distribution grid. We were able to generate 30% of the energy of that community in the design locally using power flow models, and share that energy amongst the community using the existing wires and the existing grid. And so we want to think of it that way and get faster down the road on this so that we can sprinkle this generation and storage around in the optimal locations, and then have that be a microgrid, if you will, below the substation. Think about that. The meter is the substation. And this is something that the Clean Coalition and Craig Lewis has said for years. Think about it that way and optimize below the substation. And one other thought here is, why don't we have a program where we have large storage, flow batteries, if you will, at substations, so we can really generate, store, and then distribute that energy in the substation, in the community when it's needed. Thank you.
Greg, you're not minimizing that there are administrative or regulatory hurdles.
The biggest policy hurdle, in my opinion, is the fact that the utilities are not compensated for the performance of supporting these community scale microgrids. That's a huge step that we can take that can get this going much faster. In other words, if the utilities were paid, you know, and made some profits by supporting what we need in our communities, what we're asking for: resilience, local energy, clean, secure. If they were compensated to support that, we would be much further down the road. That's the biggest policy issue that we know of. And the Climate Center is helping lead that charge with their ACE initiative, their Advanced Community Energy Initiative in Sacramento.
Performance-based compensation.
Performance-based compensation, which Hawaii is down the road on, and we're behind.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody. This is it's been a great conversation. It's the kind of subject which needs to be approached from many different angles. We've had the ACE presentation, gave us a sort of a 30,000-foot look at what's going on. It's also the conversation that needs to be followed to its ends, all the way from what an individual homeowner can do to legislation needed at the highest levels. And all those need to be pulled together. It's quite a task. It's a huge endeavor, but it's really part of a giant project which we really have to undertake. We're not going to get to greenhouse gas emission zero without doing it. So it takes a lot of persistence. I think it's fascinating myself. There's a lot of learning to do. And I thank you, everyone who's been part of the conversation thus far, for contributing to it. And please don't be frustrated if you don't understand everything all at once, because I know I certainly have not. And it takes some follow-up. I want to make sure that we don't slight a lot of the participants here with our basically what's once upon a time was the second half of our meeting every month, and that is reports from the various groups about what they're up to. We're going to have to do it in an abridged manner here, since we have less than half an hour left. But I do want to make sure we get an idea of the most important things going on especially that are planned, or ways that we can help the different component groups of us work together on the issues we're dealing with. So I know that one thing we have drawdown, Marin, is there's some thought going on about what drawdown needs to do where it is right now, perhaps developing methods of better funding it, or perhaps a minor restructure of it. So maybe, well, let's see who's here. Bill Carney's here. I don't think Colleen is. Bill, do you want to say something about what the thought is on drawdown? And also perhaps sustainable San Rafael.
Sure. On sustainable San Rafael first, what's going on at the City Council here has been a couple of things that relate to affordable housing. The whistle stop development was approved a couple of weeks ago. They have before them some questions about Loch Lomond related to the affordable units out there. So we're tracking on that sort of stuff. And anybody wants to chime in or support on that, please let me know. Yeah, on Drawdown Marin, I think the basic update would be that the steering committee has, at their last meeting, which was in March, they asked Alex, the staff person, to look into a governance structure that combined resources from the county, staffing resources from the county, with a convening of a governance structure in the form of a nonprofit. So, you know, without going into details about it, that's kind of the state of play there, I think, and very interested sort of conversation, interesting conversation. Again, anyone interested in that, several of us have been talking about that, and please let me know and we can plug you into that conversation.
Thank you, Bill. Tom, I want to make sure you get your announcement out about green change. Are you still there, Tom? His name is on the screen, but I guess he's probably stepped away for a little bit.
I'm here. Yeah.
There you are.
Yep. Yeah. So I just wanted to mention in particular, I put a couple of things in the chat when we have a meetup this coming Monday, and we got over 75 people signed up for it already, and we got some really good speakers, including Ann Administer, and she's going to be talking in particular about ways to reduce your energy use in your home. And also Bruce King's going to be speaking. There's going to be also the presentation of our group discount for LEDs. We've got this set up now with Energy Federation Inc., which is a big supplier of lights and weatherization materials to utilities and communities, programs like BayREN, Bay Area Regional Energy Network. And essentially we've got the 80% of the types of lights that you're going to have in your homes. Among them are these MR16s, which they're used a lot in recessed lights, and candelabras, you know, whole range of spots, floods. So essentially, you can get the various kinds of lights you may have in your home at a good discount. And rather than getting them sent to you from Amazon in a blister pack where you get more than you need, these lights, you know, could last a decade or more. You can get a custom order of exactly what you need in a box to you, and you can include your neighbors for that matter. So potentially, you know, you can get a great deal, custom order. And by the way, Drawdown ranks LEDs as number 18 in their list of top 100 solutions. A lot of us think, of course we've got LEDs, but in fact, there's a huge number. And this is actually a means to engage so much of the public that haven't been engaged to this point, and taking a first step and getting started, reducing demand, particularly in the evenings when we have the peaks. So
low-hanging fruit, folks. It's still there.
Very low-hanging fruit. There's tons of it out there to.
When's the meetings? When, Tom?
The event is this Monday evening, and you can just go to greenchange.net, and you can just look under events. You'll find it. You can join by Zoom, and also you can also go to greenchange.net. Just file under actions. Just go down under actions, and then you'll see the group discount there. You can just click, go right to our website, and actually get to EFI, place your order, and you can also get a look at the guide, the LEDs there.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Ken, do you want to say a few words about what's going on regulatorily and legislatively, maybe? Ken, can you hear?
You talking to me, Doug?
There we go. Yeah, yeah.
regulatorily, there's CPUC came out with a new decision, new proposed decision on resource adequacy, RA, that they've come back with a central buyer concept that where PG&E will act as a central buyer on that. It's problematic. It's being opposed by all of the CCAs because it may have the result of not compensating the CCAs for contracts they've entered into previously. That's the major regulatory thing going on at the moment. There also have been integrated resource plans that are put out by all the entities where the CPUC has adopted a higher greenhouse gas, million metric tons of 46 million metric tons of greenhouse gases. Most of the entities in the state wanted him to come in with a lower level of 38. And so it's the usual thing where we're having to, the CPUC just does not seem to be moving aggressively enough to implement to get us towards our greenhouse gas reduction goals as they need to be. So.
Thank you. That's very brief and concise. Excellent. I wanted to ask, in that context, Vicken, does the RFO for hydrogen have anything that's an RA for resource adequacy?
Yes.
Is that related at all to this challenge from the state and from the CPUC?
Yeah, it's you know, it's a little bit disappointing to see this kind of a proposal. We were supporting the central buyer to be the buyer only on the margin, but not for the whole requirement. So we are working on it to see there is an opportunity to provide comment and see if we can tweak this approach a little bit. So we're in the middle of it, like Ken mentioned, and but again, it's yet another step of disappointment. I mean, looking at just 2 years or so, we're in the millions of dollars of loss in rule changes after a rule has passed and we, go and comply with it. So these retroactive adjustments are financially are really hurting us. That's not the way to do business. But we are in the middle. We're gonna provide comments.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Annika, I noticed you've come on and joined us. Do you want to say a few words about Drive Clean Bay Area?
I would like to do that very much. So actually, I'm speaking on behalf of Cool the Earth because normally during Earth Day, we have our big schools program where we go out and do a lot of assemblies in schools to engage students, to educate and engage students K through 5, and then they bring the program home to their families. So we've quickly pivoted and created an online program. Is it okay if I share my screen to talk a little bit about it?
Okay, we have very little time, but
yeah,
do it, sure.
Okay, I'll talk first about it just briefly, and then I'll share my screen and I'll share the link to the screen as well. So basically what we've done is we've set up 3 animated children's videos that tell the story of Coda the polar bear. This is typically what we do in an assembly, and talk about his hardships that he's going through right now, asking humans if they can help us. And then we have a YEV video. Then we ask, please watch the next video with your parents. So then we have a 1-minute YEV video. And then right after that, we ask families together to make pledges. So we've changed, typically our pledges are like, go to school in a green way, so people aren't going to school right now. So instead we're asking kids to, take a shorter shower and ride your bike and walk around your neighborhood, things like this. And we're asking parents to pledge to make their next car electric or to not buy a new gas car again, kind of thing. So I'll just briefly, if I might just share my screen. This is our new website for Cool the Earth. So this will actually, we're in the midst of finalizing our videos right now. Things are moving very quickly. It's been very time sensitive. So there's the first chapter is available here if you guys want to take a look. We're trying to get the word out to teachers right now because teachers are really scrambling to find content for their students just even on a day-to-day basis, but also especially for, let's have a celebration now for Earth Day. Let's do something fun. Everybody's trapped inside their homes. And so we've kind of outlined our program components with video, student videos, parent video, family pledges, creative activity. We have found that the engagement of parents through children is really empowering for the kids to let them actually tell their parents about what they've learned. And this is a really great way to go about it. This whole program is going to be available in English and Spanish. So I've sent some emails to lots of you to ask, for help spreading the word, and I'll put the link in here if you guys want to share this on Nextdoor to help get the word out, or if you want to email me, that's fine. I can send you some other assets if you need it. So the idea is the more pledges we get, we will make a donation to the World Wildlife Fund to actually adopt a polar bear.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Let's see. Belle, have you come up yet? No. Do you have something, again, try to be concise? I think you're still muted, Belle.
Okay,
There we go.
I'll unmute.
You're muted again.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'll just mention that the Lead on Climate event that we have been talking about, which has to do with climate and the elections, how the Earth shapes this election. It has been, we've changed the date to September 21st. When we changed it, we thought that was really smart, but it's not clear what's been going on on the 21st, whether we can have an event with 500, 800 people. So we're giving some reconsideration of the format for this, although we probably will still have the major presenters like our congressman and a few other people, one from the Sunrise Movement and an economist. So we're working on that. We'll have a meeting of the group in June, and we'll be able to report whatever imaginative ideas we have for September then.
Oh, great. Well, thank you.
If I could add quickly just one positive spin on the title. It is how the Earth wins this election.
Yeah, sorry. Very good.
Great. Okay. Does Tamara have a report? Is she still there with you, Bill?
She's actually up on her telephone right now doing resilient neighborhoods. So it's healthy and proceeding, and considering a virtual manifestation as well.
Okay. Okay. I wanted to see if I could catch up with you. Greg, you're still there. I don't know if Kurt's still there. I see Kurt is, at least his screen's blacked out. Do you want to, can you say anything about, what is Kurt? About what you're up to with, I know you've been following the legislative.
Yeah, so the update is that the legislature is doing almost nothing this year that's not related to COVID. We're hearing, so the Climate Center, we had two bills introduced that would advance the two core pillars of the Advanced Community Energy Initiative. Senator Nancy Skinner introduced legislation to start moving towards what Peter talked about, which is working towards an open access local electricity market, that following up on David's question. And the other core pillar of ACE is community energy resilience planning, that was reflected in SB 1314 introduced by Senator Bill Dodd.
Which
essentially,
yeah.
The leadership is basically in Sacramento is constrained everybody severely in terms of what's actually going to move forward this year. So we're hoping that there's still going to be an opportunity to administratively move some of these things forward. We're in conversation with people in the governor's office to have them start setting forth administratively some of these actions. But have everybody understands the need to focus on community energy resilience. So we'll do the best we can, probably administratively this year. Legislatively, realistically, it's probably not going to be until 2021.
Doug, it's Kiki. If I could get a second, that'd be great.
And then Pat is just got to get done.
Go ahead, Kiki.
Thanks. Just a little bit of good news. The county on Tuesday in their first WebEx entirely electronic meeting, which went really well, by the way, selected CLAM, the Community Land Trust Association of West Marin, and their nonprofit affordable housing partner, Eden Housing, who are also the developers of the Whistle Stop affordable housing project for seniors. CLAM and Eden have won the bid to develop the now vacant and surplused Coast Guard site in Point Reyes Station. So CLAM's been working on this with the community for about 5 years, and it was a huge effort and a huge win. So I just wanted to share that good news.